Alrighty, I'm showing 2:02 on my computer, so let's go on ahead and get started. I want to welcome everyone to the Using CHAMPS for Hazard Mitigation Projects webinar. Start time is 2 o'clock, finish time is 3:30 today. I want to do some introductions from the University of Louisville Center for Hazard Research and Policy Development. We have Ben Anderson and Andrea Pompey-Lacey. They'll be doing a lot of the heavy lifting today, talking about the CHAMPS system. Ben will be walking us through completing the Mitigation Action Forms, which used to be called Letters of Intent, LOIs, and he'll also show us the projects inside of CHAMPS. My name is Doug Eads. I work with Kentucky Emergency Management. I'm a systems analyst and a systems integration manager here. Been with KYM for almost 5 years. It'll be 5 years in April. And have had the pleasure of working on CHAMPS with the University of Louisville and with our other partners, Department for Local Government, and with FEMA, University of Kentucky, and a company called Stantec, who did the development and the coding on it. During our webinar today, if you have any questions, you can use the chat feature there. Be sure and you can raise your hand if you'd like, or you can just go ahead and type in a question and send it to Ben or myself, and we'll be able to type back to you, and we'll be able to answer your questions. We're not doing any type of certificates for today on today's training. Basically, with this disaster that was declared from back in August, DR 4196, we know that we're going to be getting some mitigation funding coming as a result of that. So the Kentucky Hazard Mitigation Council decided that this would be a good disaster to start truly implementing CHAMPS into the mitigation cycle. So all projects that will be submitted to FEMA from Kentucky will be worked through the CHAMPS system. We have some other KYM folks on the line. Jenny Jo Bronner, who is the State Hazard Mitigation Officer. She's the go-to guru on mitigation. Some folks from the University of Kentucky who do grant management for us. They're on the line also. As we work through the letters, your letters of intent, as we work through your mitigation action forms, those folks will be able to help you formulate a really good project. And the folks from the University of Louisville and myself will be available to help you maybe with the system and kind of the technical side of it. So with those introductions, I'm going to go on ahead and turn it over to Ben.
All right, actually.
And Ben, go on ahead and take it away.
Yeah, this is.
Oh, sorry, Andrea.
That's okay. Yeah, I don't really have much of a masculine voice, but I'm going to start off. My name is Andrea Pompey-Lacey. I'm going to give you a basic overview of the CHAMPS system, and then additionally what we're really going to be honing in on today being the projects module and the funding module. So this month actually is where the rubber hits the road, where we're actually going to be asking you to get into the system, revise those mitigation action forms that are existing for your municipalities, and then additionally add new mitigation action forms or projects that you would like to go ahead and apply for this HMGP grant cycle. Okay, so today I'm going to go over how to access training materials, talk about your user role, how to get into the system, and then we'll really delve into funding. Doug's going to show you how to look up funding opportunities for the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program, and then Ben's going to go through each of the steps of those mitigation action forms. So here's the breakdown of how we're going to go about the training today. As we were saying, it's going to be live in the system. We'll show you step by step, and we'll be completing the training at 3:30. Now, after the webinar today, we do have other webinars scheduled for walking others through the CHAMPS system. So if you do see or know of others that have not been in the system previously, make sure to share that information about future trainings that we have offered. Additionally, we do have navigational tutorials that have been developed, which is a pretty much, for lack of better words, a Bible for the CHAMPS system. So each one of the steps that we'll be talking you through today, you can also look at in electronic published format. And then we have additional training tutorials that are in the video format for you to look at as well. So first I'm going to start off talking about the CHAMPS framework. Really, it all revolves around disaster resiliency. So resiliency is a measure of a community's ability to utilize resources and prepare for, respond to, and recover from disasters. It encompasses that whole disaster management cycle. And when we talk about how we structured the CHAMPS system, we really focused in on the risk component and the mitigation component of resiliency. First, a community needs to understand their risk and be able to utilize whatever resources to respond to an event. So you need to understand what your community has in order to mitigate. Then once you have that inventory or your community profile, you'll be able to determine what type of actions need to be taken to reduce loss of life and property from a disaster occurring. Taking that conceptual framework of how we think about resiliency and applying it to the CHAMPS system, you can see that we have 5 modules that are located in the system. 3 of the modules are pertaining to that risk component of resiliency, and the other 2 modules are focused on mitigation. Of course, today we're going to focus on the mitigation side of things. So how to apply for and manage funded projects, and then additionally how to search for funding opportunities within the system. And when you think about that in a cyclical format or a process format, really those first steps of understanding your risk are developing your community profile, conducting assessments and analyses, and then developing your policy and planning frameworks that lay out your mitigation actions that you're going to pursue down the line. Then, of course, once you understand what projects you want to go after, you then can search for external funding sources or even figure out how internally you're going to go about accomplishing certain mitigation projects, and then actually manage those projects once they've been implemented. So first, we're going to start with the very first point in which we talk about the mitigation action forms, and that's when you're generating your project idea. So on the screen here you can see an old grant application for the HMGP program. So what we've been talking about earlier and how we're really, the rubber hits the road today is where you'll be actually applying for those funds through the CHAMPS system. So we'll walk you through the new process that takes, it previously was in a Word document, electronic format that way, and now it'll actually be within the system itself. So who will be applying for MAFs? The majority of you that are on the webinar today will actually be applying for the HMGP funding in the author role. At the manager and administrator level, that will be a level that state employees, state staff, your grant managers, and those that are on the state mitigation council will actually be reviewing your mitigation action forms within the system. So let's think about the MAF as far as a process. So ideally, the understanding is that you would go about submitting your mitigation action form prior to a disaster occurring. So that form would be submitted proactively. Now, as we're sitting here talking today, the disaster has occurred, right? We've had the disaster declaration from the rain we've had and the damage we've had from last August. So now we're at the point where we're going to be talking about the funding that's available and is going to be allocated for the program. So revisiting that mitigation action form, and this is all to preface kind of what Ben and Doug are going to go over later on. The mitigation action form we like to joke about is a 12-step program. So 12 steps you go through. They're pretty basic. Some are more detailed than others. And you need to answer those questions prior to submittal to the State Mitigation Council for consideration. So once you've filled out the steps with your mitigation action form and the disaster is hit or the event has hit, then the manager or administrator at the state level is going to go into the funding module and enter in the information for you to view at the local level about how much money has been allocated for that disaster and what the breakdown is as far as what types of projects you'll be able to apply for. So that brings us to the funding module. So after your project has been identified, then when the disaster occurs, you'll go into the funding module to look for those funding sources. So breaking down the funding module, it's very, there's a lot of submodules that are contained within it. and Doug will go through the specifics of each one. I'm going to briefly go over each one of those. So the disaster management submodule is really where you're going to find that basic information about that disaster declaration. So this is a lot of what you would see on FEMA's website, where they have a map that shows counties that have reached their public assistance threshold. You'll be able to see that within this incident form here. Then also you can look at whether your community has reached your individual threshold at the county level. So that is calculated according to population, and it's multiplied by a per capita factor that is updated each fall. So Doug will show you how to go in and look at whether your county has reached their threshold or not. He'll talk about the HMGP funding splits. So there are 4 different splits within the HMGP program, 3 of which you'll be able to apply for funding through: regular funding, initiative, and planning funding. And then the HMGP lock-in amounts. This is showing the different amounts that have been received as far as what types of damages have been assessed. So over a certain period of time, as time increases, typically the amount of damages that have been assessed and completed increases as well. So this shows you kind of at different points within that lock-in amount how that has changed. And then important to, from a grant application standpoint, and also for managing the grant, the particular source that you want to apply for, the cycle timeline shows the declaration date, the application period in which you're able to apply, and then the period of availability in which, if you've received that hazard mitigation grant funding, how long you have to actually implement and complete the project. So once you've gone in and looked for what funding has been available and decide what type of project you would like to apply for this particular disaster, it's then the point in time where you want to revisit your Mitigation Action Form, or your MAF, and apply that MAF to the disaster event that has occurred. And the way in which you would go about doing that is you would revisit your application, and then you would go to select the disaster funding source that you want to apply it to. And then likewise, you would then actually hit the submit button. So it will then be under consideration by the Kentucky Mitigation Council. So at that point, they'll be reviewing the Mitigation Action Form, and if your MAF is selected, you'll be requested to complete an application in which at that point in time, one of the grant managers at the state level will actually be working with you to complete that full application. Once the application is completed, it'll then be reviewed at the state and federal level, and then you'll be able to initiate your project, which in the future there is the capability for managing your project during implementation within the CHAMPS system. But today, of course, we're going to focus on that first step, the Mitigation Action Form. All right, so now I'm going to jump out of the presentation, and we'll go ahead and open up the CHAMPS system. Let's go to... So to get into the CHAMPS system, you're going to go to kymweb.com. And this is where the KYM SharePoint site is located. Now, you'll want to select whether you're on a public or a private computer. Here we're on from the Center for Hazards Research today at U of L. We're going to hit private computer. And then I'm going to ask Ben real quick, should I log on as myself? Is that okay?
Or author
okay.
Works.
Or author. Okay. So typically you're going to type in your first last name. And then you'll type in the password that is associated with your account. And here you can see, for those of you that have not been in SharePoint for a period of time, the page has changed a little bit. In previous trainings, we showed the CHAMPS server as being in a different part of the screen. But now it's actually located partway on the left-hand side underneath A through J on the SharePoint homepage. And you'll see there's two links for the CHAMPS system. The top one is the live server, so that's for business. That's for the mitigation action forms that you really truly want to work on and submit to KYEM and FEMA. The training server below is for play. This is the area that you'll just want to tinker around with the system, get a feel for it, familiarize yourself with the modules. So that's just to make you aware when you actually want to submit a mitigation action form truly, you'll want to go into the live server, which is the first one on the list. But today we're going to jump into the training server. So we know we're in the training server because it shows up here in red bold font that we're working from the training server. That's just something to know later down the line in case you're unsure at that point in time. On the upper right-hand side of the screen, it's going to show you your username, and it'll also show you what role you have within the system. Now, for those of you that are on from the local level, and you will be going into the system to apply for these funds, if you log in and you see that it's CHAMPS Viewer, make sure you let us know, and we'll make sure that we give you additional access to the system, because obviously, in a viewer role, you're really not going to be able to make edits, and we want to make sure that that is accessible to you. At the top of the screen, you can see we have each one of the modules shown here. Of course, we're going to go over funding and projects. And then I'm going to go ahead and scroll down to the bottom of the screen. You'll see that there's a map here, kind of similar to what you would see in Google Maps. And there's different points on this map. Now what this map is showing are mitigation actions in Kentucky. So it's showing mitigation action forms, or MAFs, that have been completed by communities. Now just to make you aware, as the CHAMPS system was first being populated with information, one of the things that KYEM has done at the state level is they've really done the groundwork or the background work to enter in information from LOIs that have been submitted previously by communities for the HMGP program. So something to make you aware of is that when you go into the system and you look up mitigation action forms for your community, likely you're going to see applications or LOIs that have been submitted in previous years. So what you want to do is go in there and look at those MAFs that are in the system, decide, do we want to keep these or do we want to get rid of them, or actually do we want to enter in new MAFs for our community. So that's just something to make you aware of, so that when you go in, you're not surprised by all the applications that you see in there. So in the search bar here, it does an automatic search as you're typing. If there's a particular project that you want to look up, you just start typing in whatever keyword it is that you want to pull up. So now I've started to type in Carroll County, and I'm going to go ahead and select a project here, and it's going to zoom into that particular point. If I click on that point, I can see the different information that's contained within the MAF, and this is the information that Ben is going to go over shortly here with you. So you can see there's cost, a funding description, and these are all questions that you're going to see when you go to complete your MAF. So you can see in this application in particular, there's quite a bit of description, and you'll hear it time and time again. That's more description is better for your consideration and your eligibility for funding. All right, so not to get into it too much because Ben's going to be going over this again, I'm going to go ahead and pass on the presenter controls to Doug, and he's going to jump into the funding module and show you how to search for funding within the system.
Okay, thanks, Andrea. Okay, so you should be seeing the training server that Andrea was working on there a little bit earlier. Once again, it's good to note across the top, currently working on the CHAMPS training server. And I sent out a message by chat. If any of you don't have a username or a password to get into KYM SharePoint, please let us know. What we're doing is all the folks who are going through this training, we're making sure that they have usernames and passwords after they complete this training. So what we want to do is, when we started designing CHAMPS several years ago, we wanted to work on the premise of being very, very transparent. Being able to let people see what's going on across the state, let people see what's going on inside of KYM as far as funding. And so that's what we're going to get into now about the funding streams. I'm going to go through about 5 different submodules. And when you come into the system, we're going to go into the funding module. And we'll see it load up here. And under the funding module, there are several different areas that we're going to go into. We're going to look at disaster management. We're going to look at the disaster data sheet, thresholds, funding splits, lock-in amounts, and different things that you can search for inside of the system to kind of see what's going on. Now, of course, we all know that every disaster starts on a local basis. And so what we want to do is we want to go in and we want to talk about how the states, about how KYM actually takes a state event and how we capture all the information, how we put that into the system, and then how we take and roll that into a federally declared disaster. So when you, and of course, just keep in mind as we go through this today, we're looking at the training server, and we encourage you to get into the training server and play around, create stuff. You're going to see a lot of funny different types of projects in here. You might see like Doug's generator project, or you know, just different silly names in the system. You might see like a disaster here called DR1111 Doug Training, just for people to be able to get in and play around with it. So when you come into the system, if you noticed here under Disaster Management Overview, what I did is I clicked on State Incidents. We can toggle back and forth between federal disasters and state incidents. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in and we're going to take a look at a disaster from last year. So what we could do is we can actually toggle off and on based on the top each one of these headers, and it will do an automatic sort for us. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down and let's find one from about a year or two ago. Actually, we're going to use the March 2012 tornadoes. And that is an actual disaster, so you're going to see some real information in it. If you notice across here, you know, it says, are there any files associated with it? What is the state incident number? The way that KYM catalogs and tracks incidents is we use the year for the first 4 numbers, and then our 24-hour call center gives a sequential number to every single phone call that they get. Every single call that comes in gets a number assigned to it. So for this specific disaster, the incident number was 2012-0772. That was the 772nd call that our EOC received in 2012. And we assigned a title to it, just a short descriptive title, and then when was the executive order date? So when did the governor elevate it to a state disaster? When was there a gubernatorial declaration? And then over on the right-hand side, we can see whether or not this specific state incident has been elevated to a federal disaster. So let's go over and let's take a look at the details that have to do with this specific state incident, these tornadoes from back in March 2012. So what we're doing is we're just showing some of the basic information and incident summary. The title of it, once again, was the March 2012 tornadoes. Here's when the governor put out an executive order that can be found out on the Secretary of State's website. A short description: severe storms, tornadoes, straight-line winds, and flooding that affected all regions of the Commonwealth with localized extreme damage in northern and eastern Kentucky. Here's the time frame of the disaster, of the state disaster, from February 29th, 2012, that was a leap year, through Saturday, March 3rd. When you're doing these applications, a lot of times it will ask what type of disaster is this mitigating against, or what type of hazard is it mitigating against. So we went on ahead and we specified the associated hazards with this specific incident. These were the counties that received a local declaration. So their judge executive or someone at the local level who has the authority to declare a state of emergency in these counties, these were the ones who declared during this specific incident. Now, so we've looked at the state incident. Let's go over and let's take a look at the federal incident. Okay? So once again, we can just do a little drop down here. And so we know that this took place in March of 2012. So let's go ahead and let's click on DR 4057. So what it does is it pulls up the disaster data sheet from the federal side. Okay, so it tells us this is the incident summary for a federal disaster. The title of that federal disaster was the March 2012 tornadoes, DR 4057. And what is the related? How did we associate it to a local or to a state incident? Once again, this brings us back to the state incident here and gives you some details. Now these details here are the ones that were provided by FEMA. Now FEMA may have a different period that they consider the disaster than we did. Just because of the way that they catalog things and the way that they look at some of the damages, their period of time may be longer, may be shorter. So you would want to pay really close attention to the period of time. Associated hazards are the same, and then the declared counties. So basically this just shows how you could go in and you could find out what counties or what disasters have taken place over the last several years. Okay, let's jump back into federal disaster. You see we have several different federal disasters cataloged in here. We can go over, we can take a look once again under disaster management. It gives you that full menu of disasters. You can toggle back and forth between federal and between state. Just right here, really easy to do that. You can even go in and you can do a search for it. So let's look for flooding. Let's see if there's several of them in there that are now popping up with flooding in the title. So a lot of capabilities right there. So let's take a look at thresholds. One of the things that you want to keep in mind with thresholds, and when the incident is happening, it seems like we're out doing damage assessments and we're really kind of chasing this threshold. And what a threshold is, if you're not an emergency manager or if you're not actively involved with doing damage assessments, the threshold is really kind of what determines whether or not a county is declared. So let's look at local infrastructure. Let's look at government-owned infrastructure. How much damage is taking place as a result of this specific incident? As things are happening in your county, in your community, and things are getting damaged, we're starting to collect reports, damage assessment reports, about the damage to your local infrastructure, whether it be state roads, whether it be local bridges or local buildings. We want to get that information. So during this specific disaster, and once again, this was just this is in the trial server, so not all the information is all plugged in. So we're going down through here and we're looking at the counties that reported damages to us. Okay, and so we're looking at the damages here that were reported by Adair County, Ballard County, Bath County, Carroll County, and we're actually checking off whether or not they have met the threshold. Now there is a dollar amount that's set by FEMA every October, October 1, and it's a per person amount, and they take and they multiply that per person amount by the threshold from the last census, and that's what determines your damages. So for Adair County, the threshold is somewhere under $201,000. Let's say for Grayson County, let's say that maybe their threshold is $50,000 and they only had $25,000 worth of damage. Well, then they would not have met that threshold. Part of where we're going with our damage assessment process and with the CHAMPS process is we're actually going to tie in those damage assessments directly into this module here where it'll do an automatic feed. Right now, someone from KYM is actually entering this information in as it's reported to us. So that's just a way for you to be able to go in and look at the disaster thresholds in here. And you can go in, you can look at different files that may be associated with this specific disaster. Maybe someone in your county sent up some damage assessment worksheets. We would actually house those inside the system for you. Okay? So we've looked at the disaster management side, the disaster data sheet. We've looked at disaster thresholds. Now we're going to look at funding splits. And funding splits are very important because there are three major types of mitigation projects. Okay? You have regular, initiative, and planning. What we're going to do is we're going to go in and we're going to look at the amount of funding that's available in each one of those types of grants. Now, sometimes we think about types of grants. We think of generator projects. We think of acquisition projects. That's more of a granular level. This is the three big breakouts inside of the hazard mitigation money that is given to the state, given to the Commonwealth by FEMA. Now, I said there were three major fund types. Actually, there's four. If you look at the state management costs down here, in years past, before we had the system, it was kind of a guessing game for you on the local level to know how much money is coming into the state from the state management side. Now, if we look at this total here of $5 million down here at the bottom, okay, 178,000 of that is what is used to pay the employees of KYM, the grant managers of KYM who are working directly on the mitigation program. And if you notice at these breakouts, you see regular, initiative, and planning. And where do you see the largest amount of money? You see it right up here with regular. And why is that? Regular projects, those projects like acquisition projects, elevation projects, major construction projects, they have the longest lasting impact, and they do the best job of mitigating against future losses. So if you have an area that's been flooded repeatedly and those houses are getting flooded out, what's the best way to mitigate against future losses? To do a regular project that would buy out the homes and go on ahead and tear those homes down, put it back into green space. So when you come in and you look at the funding splits, you'll see how much money has been projected from FEMA that we're going to be getting in the state, and then you'll see how many MAFs or how many projects are in the works at the time. So this would be where when you're starting to do your mitigation action forms and you're starting to select a specific funding stream, this would be like where you would say, I want this generator project to be funded by DR 4057. That's where this number, this $20,500,000 is coming from. And then what's the total amount that we have submitted to FEMA for funding that the Kentucky Hazard Mitigation Council has submitted to FEMA? That's the $4.2 million. So we want to be very transparent with what money's coming in, what money is in the works, and what money and what projects have been submitted to FEMA, and that's where you can capture that information. All right, so let's take a look at lock-in amounts. And let me just remind you that in the past, we really didn't have a good way for you to be able to come in and take a look at all this information. You'd have to call up the State Hazard Mitigation Officer. She'd have to dig into an Excel spreadsheet. He or she would have to dig into that, maybe information that's 4, 5, 6, 7 years old. Now we're tracking information back about 8 years, I believe. I know we went back about 10 or 11 disasters on it. So let's take a look at those lock-in amounts. So let's go down here once again to DR 4057. Very easy just to go through and just pick which disaster you want to get the information on. Now, lock-in amounts basically have to do with the time frame after the disaster is declared. And so what happens? You have public assistance, damage assessments, and then you get the declaration from the public assistance side. You get a declaration from the from the individual assistance side. And so the mitigation dollars are based on the public assistance declaration. And so there is a certain formula that FEMA uses that says if you have this amount of public assistance damage, then we're going to give a certain amount of money in mitigation. It's a certain percentage that'll be added on, and that'll go for mitigation. Now, that number, because FEMA is kind of slow on the public assistance side and because their PA numbers can change up and down, our numbers on the mitigation can change. So 30 days after the declaration, we may be told by FEMA, you're going to have $3.6 million, but then 90 days later, we may have a different number, or 6 months later, we may have a different number. In this example, we were fortunate the number stayed the same all the way through. But as you go in and you look at a new disaster, you may see that the 30-day amount is $1 amount, and then the 6-month amount may be, maybe $500,000 more, maybe $25,000 less. So we just wanted to share how those numbers are determined. And this is the state management cost. Of these dollars here, how much of that, once again, is going to state management cost. So we've talked about disaster management. We've talked about the thresholds, how to see if your county has met those thresholds or not. We've talked about funding splits, and we've talked about the lock-in amounts. Let's take a look at the cycle timelines. Once again, time frame. Okay, and what this has to do with is it has to do with the amount of time you have to put together your mitigation action forms, and the amount of time that you have to, once those mitigation action forms have been chosen, to actually get your project in a good working order and get it submitted to FEMA, and then to actually work the project. So in this example here, disaster DR 4057, you have the March 2012 tornadoes. When was it declared, and then what's the time frame that you have to actually apply for the funding? It's a 1-year time frame from the point of declaration. Now, we don't know yet firm numbers how much we're going to receive for this specific disaster, this DR 4196, the one that was declared from back in August this year. We're expecting, kind of hoping, thinking that we're going to get around $1.2 million in mitigation funds. The threshold for a state disaster is $6 million. We came in at about $6.2 million. We're still waiting for those firm numbers from FEMA on that, but we're looking at about $1.2 million. So from the date of declaration, we'll have 1 year to get your MAFs in and get the projects. Really, the period of time for the MAFs is a short period of time. It's about a 30-day notice there. What will happen is Jeannie Jo Bronner, our State Hazard Mitigation Officer, the SHMO, she will send out a notice of funding, a notice of funds availability. She'll send that out through the area development districts, through the local emergency managers, through the judge executives, and she'll let you know when that money is available, and then she'll let you know what the time frame is on those mitigation action forms. At that time, you'll come into the system and you'll start entering in your project ideas. Now, the good thing about the system is you don't have to wait until you get that notice from Jenny Jo. You can go on ahead and jump in there tomorrow, jump in there one day next week and start working some project ideas. Go look at your old project ideas from past projects that you submitted, but maybe they didn't get chosen, and maybe tweak those out a little bit. And then what's the time frame that the money is available for you to actually do the project with? That's this period of availability. And we can extend these out. We have the ability in the system to actually go in and extend this out because we know that most of our projects in the timeline take longer than a year or two from the declaration date. We normally look at about a 3-year time frame, especially on acquisition projects and elevation projects and the major construction projects. So that takes us through the funding module, and just a way to be transparent with you about what all is going on inside the system for you to be able to go in and take a look at what money is coming in, what money came in prior disasters, and then how that money is being allocated out across the Commonwealth from the state all the way down to the locals. So I'm going to turn it over to Ben at this time, and Ben's going to let us jump into the Mitigation Action Form. All right.
All right, thank you, Doug.
Our presenter. All right.
All right, so we're going to go through the Mitigation Action Form, and that is really the meat of what this training is about today. It's going to show you what you're actually going to need to do to apply for funding for your community. So to get to the Mitigation Action Form, you want to go into the Projects module, and then the Mitigations Actions Overview. Now on the Mitigation Actions Overview page, you can view a list of all past applications, and I encourage you to go in there, look what other people have applied for. There are some great ideas in there. And then also you can apply for or create a new MAF or edit your old MAFs. So there are several things you can do on this screen to help narrow your search down. You can search by name. So we'll just type in Louisville, see if any are in the system. So any application that has the word Louisville in it shows right here. You can also change it by these columns along here. So you can sort by cost, or sorry, by modified date or by cost, but I'm searching by cost. So the most recent Louisville application shows up. You can search by name on any of these. You can expand your list. So this is a good place, and you can view any mitigation action form that has been submitted in the system. So I want to go back though, because really I'm looking at creating a new MAF right now. And you don't have to wait for a disaster to create a MAF. ideally the best time to do this is during your mitigation plan update process, or just when you have downtime. Anytime that you guys identify a good idea to reduce future losses in your community, or a need for like a generator to help respond during an emergency, it would be a good time to come into the system and add your idea. You don't have to have funding available at the time to get your idea in there, because like Doug said, once a disaster is declared, there isn't a whole lot of time to get the MAFs in. So you can get them in this repository at any time, and that way when there is an event, all you have to do is go in and apply that project for funding. And if time's passed, you'll also probably need to update some of the estimates, but you have most of the work already done. Alright, so now we're going to go in and create a new MAF. So to do that, we'll just click this Create New MAF button at the top. And that's a 12-step process. And the first step is very simple. It's just giving your project a title. And you want to do a descriptive title that clearly states where the project is and what it's for. So we'll say this one will be Arlington Fire Station Generator Project. And we'll click this green button here to create the MAF project. So now this mitigation action form is created. It takes us to the next step where we identify some information about the applicant. So this first question is where you indicate the type. So eligible applicants are the state, local governments, and nonprofit organizations. So we're applying on behalf of Arlington. So we're going to select local government. The applicant is typically, well, it's the user you're signed in as, is who the applicant's going to be listed as. The point of contact needs to be a user who is registered with SharePoint, and this will typically be the author of the MAF, but it could also be another person in your community. So we'll say that I'm going to be the point of contact on this one. And then the sub-applicant can be a person, but typically the sub-applicant is going to be the organization that is applying for funding. And then your funding source. So this is the federally declared disaster that you're applying for funding for. So right now we're going to leave it blank because I'm going to come back and look at this later. And we're also just going to go ahead and hit save and exit. You can go back or next, but I want to back out of this MAF and go into one that I've already created that has a lot more information, so I don't have to sit here and type, as well as show some actual information for an actual application that's been entered. So we'll click save and exit. There we go. And now I want to find the one I actually want to enter in, so I'm going to click on the modified on twice because I know it was one of the more recently ones. And I want to go to this one, the Arlington Generator Project. So when you hover over the options button, you get several different options. You have a more info, edit, submit, view the status history, and delete. I don't want to delete it right now, but let's look at the more info. So this is just a quick way to see what's in the MAF without having to go into it. You can see the description, your location, the costs associated with it, hazards faced. So all the MAF information is listed here. So we'll just close that out. You could also, sorry, let me get the right one. You could also submit it, and we'll go over that later. View the status history. So what has gone through with this MAF? Well, it's been created, submitted, withdrawn, and in progress. So right now it's in progress right now. So we're just going to go ahead and go into more info. And that's a good way for like older MAFs that you've submitted several times. You can look at how many times you've submitted them and see other changes that you've made over time to them. Alright, so we're going to go into Edit. So when you go into Edit, it takes you to the project title screen, and you can use these radial or circles at the top to skip to a step, or you can use the next button. We're just going to use the next button so we can look through it. So you can see this one's had a disaster selected. Alright, so the third step is where you enter some general information about the project. And for project description, you want to provide as detailed of a description of the project as you can. The more detail you give, the more information that the committee is going to have when they're selecting projects. And having that detail will allow them to see that, one, you've fully thought out the project, that you know what you want to do, you've provided a clear description of why you need to do it, and ideally you show some benefit in there as well. Alright, so our description is here. Then project type. So this is the type of project you're applying for. Right now we're doing a generator, so we've selected the generator. These project types are controlled by KYM, so as new FEMA project categories become eligible, they'll add some additional types, or if a project becomes ineligible, they'll remove it. Whether you're a CRS participant, so this is the community rating system, and if you're not certain whether your community is a participant, you can find out by clicking the Help button right here, and that'll actually open up another web page that takes you to the Community Rating System, Communities and Classes page, where you can download a PDF that shows the current Community Rating System school categories for communities. So we'll go back to the MAF application page. And now there's also community NFIP status. So are you participating in the National Flood Insurance Program? And are you active, suspended, or not participating? And if you are active, are you in good standing? Yes or no? Now again, if you're not sure on this, you can click the Help button. That'll take you to Kentucky's page for a listing of all the communities in Kentucky and their NFIP participation status. Alright, so we know for Arlington that we're not a CRS participant, we are active, and we are in good standing. So we can move on to the next page. Alright, so this fourth step is where you really detail your project location as well as some of the hazard that you're mitigating against. So we'll come over to the MAF location at the end, but you just select your county. So we're in Carlisle County. This is a simple drop down. Once you've selected your county, you can select the location or jurisdiction, and you have the full county or the cities within the county, and we're in Arlington. The applicable hazard mitigation plan, if it has been entered into CHAMPS, it will be selectable here. A priority for your MAF. So this is used so if you're submitting two different applications to KYM for funding, and one of them is something that you really need to do. It has a really high benefit to cost ratio for you. This is something that your community desperately needs. You'd probably want to mark that as very high. Now if you have another project that your community needs too, good benefit, good cost, but it's not as dire of a need. It's not as big of a project, something that you desperately need, then you might want to place it as high or medium. That way the committee, when they're looking at your two projects, if they've come down to picking two projects from your community and they have those two projects, they can see that, well, this one is, they're very high. This is what they really want to do. It's to help them to make sure that the Mitigation Council isn't selecting your second project over your first project if all other things are equal. The hazard to be mitigated against. So on the MAF, you can only select one hazard, so you're selecting your primary hazard. Now, when you actually get into the project, you can select multiple hazards. On this step, though, you just select the primary hazard you're mitigating against. So we selected winter storm, although for a generator, a severe storm would also be a good possibility. But since we have to pick one, we just selected severe winter storm. And now to pick geography. So there are two ways to pick your geography. You have the mapper and manual. So we'll click over to the manual first, and you can select point, line, polygon, and with a point you just have two different latitude and longitude coordinates that you can enter, and you can see the ones that have been entered here. With a line you'll get to enter up to 4 points, same with a polygon. Now the mapper is pretty neat because it saves you from having to type in coordinates if you don't have them readily at hand. You're able to either type in an address and search that way. Sorry, can't move it. We'll just enter in the address I'm at right now. And it'll take you into that location. And you can change the view from streets to imagery or topographic. I like imagery because it gives a picture of the buildings. And you can select point, line, or polygon. If you select point, you just click the point, and you can just drop the point. Line, we'll just do a line. That's for if you're doing maybe a road segment, a bridge, something that's linear. And to start, you just click. And then for each segment you want, you'll click again, and to end, you'll double click. That'll do your line. And then polygons, just like lines, click to start, click for intersection, and then double click to complete. Now when you're drawing polygons and lines, you can't cross yourself, so don't try and close the polygon. So if you're drawing a square, you want to click, and we'll start over. So click here, so if you're doing a square, click, click, and then at this intersection to close it, since this is going to be your last segment, you want to double click here and it'll close it. Alright, so we'll cancel there, and to keep our original geography. So on this step, we've entered our geography, we've selected our location, and we've selected our hazard to be mitigated against, so we're ready to go on to the next step. And these questions are more tied towards your hazard mitigation plan. So the MAF was really designed to meet two needs. One is the requirements in FEMA's hazard mitigation planning process, and two is for the requirements for KYM in their application process, or their initial application process. And this is great because now when you're doing the mitigation plan, you can get your project ideas basically completed and ready to submit to FEMA or to KYM for funding when funding becomes available. So, does the project impact critical facilities? Is our first question. And this is, a critical facility is to your community. So there isn't one set definition on what is a critical facility. It's, is it critical to you or your community? So some communities, fire station is typically a critical facility, or the EOC or police stations. But you could also have a critical water pump station or other infrastructure that is critical. Maybe there's a key power line segment that's critical. So this is just indicating whether the project impacts something, a facility that is critical to you. Does the project impact facilities with repetitive loss? And does the project impact facilities with severe repetitive loss? So these are tied to FEMA's NFIP, or sorry, FEMA's flood repetitive loss and flood severe repetitive loss. So these are flooding questions. So if you're out of the floodplain, not doing anything in a floodplain, or with, I guess you can have repetitive loss outside of a floodplain, but these are flooding questions. And our project is outside of the floodplain and hasn't been flooded repetitively, so we're no to both of these. Will the project impact future buildings or infrastructure? Well, this is a generator project for a water pump station, I believe. So yes, it's going to impact future buildings that get built that rely on the water system. Does the project impact existing buildings? Again, yes, it impacts existing buildings that rely on the water system. The number of people this project is going to impact, we put in 320 because that was my quick Google search of the city of Arlington's population, and this project impacts the entire city. Does the project impact a smaller impoverished area? No, this isn't designated as a smaller impoverished area. Is any part of the project located in that floodplain? No, and to find this you'd want to look at your DFIRMs or digital flood insurance rate maps. And same thing with a floodway. No, and you'd look at those same flood maps. So we've answered all these questions, so we'll move on to the next step. And if anybody has any questions as I'm going, please either raise your hand or type in a question box. I have it open so I can see the questions as they come in. Alright, so step 6 says text box is just asking for more detail. So you want to describe the problem your community is encountering in the location of the project. So, and then also you want to describe the proposed mitigation action that will solve the problem. So the first one is, what's happening that is requiring that you do something about it? Second is, what are you going to do about it? So in the first one they talk about the power failures occurring after disasters and the need to keep fresh water pumped into the storage tank. And what happens if there's a fire and they don't have water in the storage tank. And then the second is what they're going to do about it, and they want to install an 80 kilowatt generator. So again, as much description as you can give, the better. That gives more information to the committee so they can make sure that they pick the best projects. Alright, step 7, more details. So we've already kind of entered in the precise location, but this is just text dialogue to do it. So you can enter in the address, you want to enter in your coordinates again, and you also want to enter in the community that you're doing the project in. So the city of Arlington with 490 people, according to this one, and this was taken straight from their application. And then describe why your community has chosen to submit this project. How was the project idea initiated? So, and they've answered with anytime power is out for an extended period, the county, they rely on the county's help to get a generator to keep the pumps running. And this would solve their problem with a permanent solution. Alright, so the next step is your project cost. So in the MAF, you don't have to have a detailed breakdown of the project costs. You will need that when you actually do the project application. But for this step, this far into it, just an overall breakdown of how much it's going to cost. And so if you type in the project cost here, you can see that they change. The federal, state, local share values change as you change the numbers. And the federal share is 75, the state share is 12%, and the local share is 13% of the total project cost. And then how are you going to meet the local share is what this text box at the bottom is asking for. And you want to describe the local match, whether it's going to be cash from your general fund or in-kind labor. And again, you want to provide as much detail on, if it's in-kind labor, what the in-kind labor is going to be if you can provide it. But you do need to pay attention to what the local share is to make sure that you are going to be able to meet the local share. So the ninth step is for attaching documentation. So you want to make sure you add any estimates for the project, project location map, just as much documentation again that you have to provide to the committee to show that this is what the project is going to cost, that you have thought it through, and that to really, if you have something that can demonstrate the benefit as well. And we have a question, so isn't labor a cash match? No, labor typically, and Jenny Jo, speak up if I'm saying something wrong, but labor is counted as an in-kind match if the county or your community is doing the labor. Now, if you're paying somebody to do the labor, then that's the cash match. But if your just community is doing it out of using salaried time to do it, then it's just in-kind labor. But it does count as your match. All right. And did that answer the question? All right, good. So now we'll move on to attaching a supporting document. So when you attach a document, you want to give it a title. And sorry, we have another question. So will a D firm be required? If you are doing a project in a floodplain, you need to attach the D firm on, it is mandatory on the project application. And Jenny Jo, would you let me know if it's required on the MAF?
All right. She's probably typing in right now.
Yep. So while we wait for that, I'm just going to go ahead and do a an attachment. So the title is, since we're talking D firm, we're going to say Arlington D firm. We'll say alright, so D firm panel showing Arlington, and then you'll just select the file. It'll bring up a box unique to your operating system, and you can just select the file. So we're just going to pretend like this is the D firm, and we'll click open, and then to submit it, you'll click submit, and now it's been submitted. You'll notice over here it's undefined gibberish. As soon as you go to the next page and then back, you'll see that the file shows, and this is the name of the file as it was on my system, but if you click details, it gives you the name and the description of it. And to get back to the D firm question, the D firm is not required with the MAF. It is good to have, and I'm sure the committee would appreciate having that information and maybe give you a leg up, but it is only required in the project application, not the MAF. But again, the more information the committee has to make an educated decision on your project, the better. Alright, so we'll move on to the next step. And we're not going to spend a lot of time here. So this 10th step is additional questions based on your MAF project type. So when you selected the project type and we selected generator, some projects have additional questions based on that project type. Now generators have several questions based on the generator application. These questions, no matter the project type, will appear similar to this, in that you'll have a couple columns with the questions numbered. You'll have your question, the text, and any guidance provided, and a text box to answer in. However, the specific questions will vary based on the project type that you're applying for. So just know that these are project specific, but you may have these depending on the project application you're filling out, or the MAF application you're filling out. And one of the cool things that we'll see later on is that some of this information that we're applying in for, or we're entering in the MAF, carries over to our project application to help make the project application easier than it used to be when you had to start over from scratch. So we'll go ahead and click Next. And this 11th step is the last step before we submit, and this is just where we review to make sure everything we've entered looks correct. And it does right now, so we can finalize and submit. And once we finalize and submit, you're verifying that everything's correct, and it's moving it to the next stage for review. Okay. Oh no, I submitted it, and I remembered the disaster in there was for the last one. Don't worry. It's submitted, but you can withdraw it and resubmit it, and we'll go through that now. Alright, so now we need to find the application we just submitted and rescue it from its current status and get it resubmitted under the correct disaster. So I just did the sort by modified on to find it. You could also search by your name in the search box or by the name of the project, however you want to. But I just did modified on, and it's the top one. So now under options you have more info, withdraw, view status history, delete. We know this is the project, but to be safe you should always check more info to make sure this is the one that you're wanting, because there may be similarly named projects, or in case you're in a hurry, just to verify. This is, so now we want to withdraw the project and provide a reason. And fix my spelling. So submitted under wrong disaster. So now we're going to withdraw it. So now it shows as withdrawn. We now need to reopen it. Now withdrawn is if you don't want to do it, you can leave it in that status. If you had an idea and you don't want to do it anymore because the conditions in your community have changed, or you've identified another action that you'd rather do for the same problem, you might want to leave things in withdrawn. But we're going to reopen it, and now it shows in progress again. So we can go back in and edit it, and we're just there. We know the only thing that I want to change, or that we need to change, is the disaster we're submitting under. So we can just click this green submit button, and now we can select the correct disaster. And we'll just say we want to submit it under 2112. But you want to, obviously you're going to want to submit it for the most recent disaster, because that's the one that is open for funding. And so we'll select this one, pretending it's the most recent, and click submit. So now we've resubmitted it for the correct disaster. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Doug for a couple minutes, and he's going to walk us through the process that the committee uses to, and how they review the application. So Doug, if you want to.
Yep, sure will. Thanks, Ben.
Thank you.
No need to change the screens or anything. I'm just going to kind of talk us through the process. So the process really hasn't changed much. How the projects get selected to get moved on to FEMA for funding. So you'll have about 30 days to come into the system, create your project idea, put as much information into the MAF as possible, and then you will pick the funding stream of DR 4196 to submit it to the Kentucky Hazard Mitigation Council for funding, to be considered for funding by FEMA. Sometime in January is kind of what we're looking at. The Kentucky Hazard Mitigation Council will come together. We will actually be able to we'll actually be able to go into the system, go into CHAMPS, and we'll be able to look at all the different projects that are that have been submitted for funding. If you remember back when we were looking under the funding module, under the funding splits, we saw that there was about $4 million worth of regular money available for that disaster, but over $20 million have been submitted. And so that's kind of what the Kentucky Hazard Mitigation Council has to work through during that process. We always get more projects than what we have money for. So what we do is we look at the counties that were double declared. So if your county received a declaration in both PA and IA, that kind of moves you to the top of the list, and the quality of your project. If you noticed, we had more money available for regular projects, for those construction projects, those acquisition projects, those elevation projects. So if you're really trying to get funding into your county, then start steering toward those regular projects because they have the longest lasting effect on mitigation, mitigating against future losses. Now, question, do you have to be one of the federally declared counties to receive mitigation dollars? So if you're in Shelby County, like Paul Whitman, you didn't receive a declaration under 4196, but you are still eligible for mitigation dollars. So just because you didn't get declared, and I think only about 4 counties were declared, 3 or 4 counties were declared under that disaster, DR 4196, you can still apply for and you can still be considered for funding, and there's a chance that you may receive funding depending on how many projects we have coming in across the state. So sometime in January is when we'll be looking through those projects that you've submitted to us. And those are folks from all over the state representing the area development groups, representing KYEM, and so they'll be going through that process of selecting the projects and moving those on into a status of migrated. So they get migrated from a MAF, Mitigation Action Form, they get migrated from that into a project. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Ben, and he can show you how you work the project through the system.
All right, thank you, Doug. So we had submitted our MAF application, and we get notification from KYM that we were one of the lucky ones. Our application has been selected to move on to the project application phase. So to find our MAF that we had submitted, that they have now selected and migrated forward for us, we want to go into the Mitigation Projects module. So the Mitigation Projects overview. And now we can see that I have one new MAF selected, listed up here, and a couple other projects that I've started working on down here. So with that, we can either withdraw if we want to, which really if you get selected you should, I mean it's a lot of money from FEMA, so it is a great deal. So we want to create the new project. Clicking that blue button, and it takes us into this screen where we verify some existing information that we had previously entered. So we want to just update the disaster to the current one, because you'll remember that when I applied for it from a different disaster, but previously I had associated it with another one. So we just needed to correct that. Now if I had gone back into the application, the MAF application, sorry, to make the change, that would have been reflected here. The applicant organization didn't carry over, so we need to add that in. But our project description has carried over. Our latitude and longitude didn't, but we can copy that from this text box that we had it in. Make sure I get them in the right order. And then we have all our project type specific questions listed here. And those are all still accurate, still there. And we'll also get another chance to verify all this information as we proceed through our project application. Alright. Hold on one sec. Alright, sorry about that. Alright, so we're going to not spend quite as much time on the project application, because when you get to this step, one, it's several months down the road, so we'll probably have more trainings for the people who get selected projects, but also you'll be working with KYM and KYM grant managers more when you're in this step, because there are quite a few requirements to meet FEMA's guidelines in the project application, so it's a much more intensive process. But we'll just briefly cover some of this stuff. So your prepared by is who you are. The manager, so this is who's going to be in charge of the project. And then your chief executive officer or applicant agent. So this will be typically be the judge executive or the mayor, somebody who has authority to sign off on the project, a high-ranking, typically elected official. We're going to use these buttons up here because we're not going to be saving it. So we can see the generator is still selected, which is correct, our associated disaster, the program type we're applying for, and it's hazard mitigation grant. And then overview of past damages. So this is something that wasn't in the previous application. Now you may have provided it as an attachment or in your description, but here you need to provide detailed information about past damages. And this is required for projects that need a BCA. You need the overview and the detailed damage records to show that you'll have the damages to meet the BCA. And you do need an extensive history of your damages. You need all the damages that you've had, or as many as you can get your hands on. I know from hearing the grants managers, this is one of the challenging parts, is tracking down those past damages. So if you've been on any other trainings in CHAMPS, we have the significant incidents and events module that allows you to track those damages, but those aren't in there now. So if you really want to be proactive, you can start tracking damages by using KYM's damage assessment app and the significant incidents and events module within CHAMPS. But for now, you're going to have to go back through your records and try and comb through either insurance records, especially if it's a private individual's house, or your own maintenance records for the past damages. And then the detailed damage records, so we'll click the green button to show you that screen. It asks for your date, gives you a nice calendar map, and you can change the year using this drop down. Or you can type in the date if that's easier for you. The level of extent is a drop down. So was it a 10-year, 25, or 10%, 4%, 2% chance annual event? Your damage statement, again, as detailed as possible. What happened? How deep was it? How fast were the winds? What got knocked off the roof? What level of the building was damaged? As detailed as you can provide. Your dollar amount damages. So this is a numeric entry form. Your indirect costs. So this is, it didn't damage the building, or even if it did damage the building, these are additional costs beyond the structural damage amount, such as cleanup costs or emergency responder costs. So costs that aren't damages, but that you incur because of the disaster or the event. And then NOAA documentation. So this, you want to provide a link to that day's weather, or a NOAA link showing the tornado. And we're just going to, rather than go finding the NOAA's website, we're going to just go over here and show you how to get a link out. So as you can see up in this address bar, it has the https:// So we want to select all that information, right click, and hit copy. The reason you want to copy it out of this address bar is because you have to have the HTTPS information. If you just type in www, it's going to be invalid. And then other supporting docs. So if you've uploaded your damage history to SharePoint and you have that link, or your community website, or if you have a Google Doc that you want to link, you can provide the link for that here. And again, you just go there, copy it, and paste it. And to get these menus, if you didn't know, I'm just bringing up and I'm right-clicking to bring up this menu. So we'll click Save to save it, but it's not going to save because I don't have it all entering it. Alright, now again, when you're actually doing it, you want to provide real information. I just want to want to get it in so I can save it. And then you can add another detailed record. And you want to do that for each event that you've had. Alright, so we're going to go on to the next step. And this is useful life of the project. And so your useful life is FEMA designated. For acquisitions, it's 100 years. For generators, it's 20 to 30 years. And that's all I'm going to say because I don't recall the rest of them. But your grants manager will know the useful life of your project if you ask them. It's FEMA guidance, and FEMA regulations determine the useful life of the project. Your project description. So this carried over from our MAF application. But if there's any additional information you want to enter, you can enter it here. Our project cost. This is where you want to enter in detailed information on how the cost estimates for the project were determined. You're going to get into in-depth, itemized breakdown of the project costs later on in this application. But this is where you can detail how you reach those estimates, and you also want to include the overall costs and what different estimates you had. And then your local share. And you want to, again, describe the source of your funds if you're doing cash, or the source of your in-kind match. Labor, well, what kind of labor, how much labor, etc. And as much detail as you can provide here. Alright, so this next step is where you select the hazard you're going to mitigate against. Now on the MAF, if you recall, we could only select one hazard that we're mitigating against. In the project application, it's nice because you can actually select more than one hazard. So we're going to select severe storm and add it. And let's select severe winter storm and add it, because these are both things that a generator will help protect against. And even let's go and add tornado. And we'll say that's good, that's all the hazards we need, but, well, they're in the wrong order. Really, severe storm is our worst hazard. You can just click this red handle and drag it and drop it to save the order. So I got the order saved, so we can move to the next step. And this is where you identify the structures that are going to be affected by your mitigation project. So in some cases, if you're doing a flood buyout or an acquisition, you may just have one structure affected by the project. In this case, we're doing a generator for a water pump station, so several houses are affected by it. So we want to go to, let's see, residential property, and yeah, as long as the we'll say 1% chance. So as long as the pump station itself isn't damaged, the generator is going to protect these residential properties from losing water. And the number of structures, we'll say there are 25 houses. And we'll add it. And now we can add a different type. So if we have a hospital, you can add it. And you can also reorder these. So if you feel like really it's more important to protect the hospital, you can drag that up as well. Same thing, you can also delete options from here. You just want to make sure that you identify all the structures that your project's going to be impacting and the level of protection that's going to be provided. Alright, so step 7, our location and acquisitions. So the location you want to provide the address for. So we already have it in this description, but we don't have it in the address form. So we're going to type it in. And I don't know the zip code, so we'll put in the example zip code. And then acquisition record. So this isn't an acquisition project, so we wouldn't do anything with this here. However, I want to show it to you. So this is, if you're doing an acquisition project, you'll need to enter in the address of every property you're acquiring, as well as the latitude and longitudinal coordinates, the year built, and whether they're substantially damaged. Now, the latitude and longitude are points only, and you have to actually know the points. Typically, I believe the point that they want is the front door. Alright, and then whether it's substantially damaged. So we're just going to cancel out of here, and we'll move on to step 8. So this is where you need to attach all of your flood documentation. So you need to have your D firm attached and identify, using the firm, the flood zones of your project. So we're CRX unshaded, we're out of it. But you want to attach a copy of the map with the project site located on the map, a topographic map of the project site with the project marked on the map. For acquisition and elevation projects, you need to include a subdivision, plat, and parcel map. You also need to attach photographs of the site, 2 for each project site. And you also need to have a picture of the project from each side of the project. So make sure that you look at this attachment, because if you just look at the page, it looks like you can attach stuff, but this goes through the requirements of what you have to attach at this point. And the attachment works just like it did on the MAF. So select the file, type in the name, so example upload for training, and submit. And there you see it shows up down here. So I'm going to go ahead. I've attached, we'll pretend like that document contained all the maps that I needed to attach and all the pictures. And we'll move on to the next step. So this is, when I was mentioning earlier, the detailed breakdowns of the costs. Uh-oh. I just noticed the time. So we're running over, so I'm going to speed up quite a bit now. And again, for the materials records, you just want to be as itemized as you can. So if you're doing concrete, you want to list the concrete per unit and how many units of concrete you have. And it'll automatically calculate the cost. Save it, and it'll update there. Same thing with labor. And same thing with fees. Your project budgets. And again, ask questions. I'm breezing through it because I just noticed that I've run over on our time. Project budget, so we'd only entered in one cost, so it shows 1,000. And you'll need to identify the breakdown here, so it's 75%, so 75 or 750. Your local share cash or in kind needs to be 13%, so 130. State shares 12%, 120. Other agencies, we don't have any, and we don't have any. Again, you need to provide an explanation of where the cash match or in-kind share is coming from, and if you have other funding, a description of where it's coming from. Your milestones. This step's important because this is where you identify the steps you're going to complete to do the project. So, purchase the generator. How many days it's going to take you to do that. And we also want to install. And as you can see, as I enter those milestones, it updates the length of time the project's going to take. So right now it's estimating 65 days. So we'll skip to the next step. Ideally, I'm sorry, do you want to say when you're moving through, you want to make sure you hit next, because that will make sure you save it. Another place to attach any additional supporting documents that you hadn't already attached to the project application. There aren't any right now that I want to attach, but it works just like it works in the other two places we've shown before. Project type-based questions. These are identical to the questions on the MAF, and they've carried over from our MAF. So you just want to verify them here, and they're correct. So now we have review and submit, where you just review all the information you've entered, make sure it looks correct to you, and looks good to me, so finalize. And now you're submitting it to KYM for review. Now, before you get to this step, there will be some additional enhancements to the system. When you do submit it to KYM, you need to actually print it out and sign it and send it to them because they need the signed copy. And we're going to be working on developing a printout with all the information that you need to sign, because there are several documents that need to be attached to the project application in addition to what you've seen. So I know I'm a couple minutes over already, but I do want to go in to an active project. So we'll pretend that all the back and forth between you, KYM, and FEMA has been completed. Your project's been accepted after all the reviews, and you're actually working it. To manage the project, you'll actually want to go into your mitigation, same page, projects overview page, and you'll want to identify the project you're working on. So we're going to pretend like it's the Laurel County generator project, and we'll go to dashboard. And this provides a view of all the information on my project. So this is the old application, the BCA information, and you can go to a link of the BCA, any contacts, and to manage the steps. So this is one of the important places, because this is where you can see the project management milestones that you need to meet, and which ones are due, which ones are overdue, and which ones you've completed. So the green check marks are ones that have been completed, the red ones are due, and the black ones down here, like unbolded but not completed, are not due yet. And you can go in and add steps if you'd like to add additional steps on your side, or you can go in and view steps for the steps that KYM has added to see what they're requiring. And now if you've had issues with it, you can edit and mark that you've completed it, or you can view the full details for it. And when you view the full details, if there's an issue on why you haven't been able to hit that deadline, you can add an issue. And this is just kind of a note and a way to document the back and forth, so when you miss deadlines, you're able to show why. And so you'd fill out this information and save. We'll cancel. We're going to click here, Mitigation Projects Overview, to go back out. So I know I'm 6 minutes over of what we were supposed to spend, but are there any questions? And if there aren't any questions, I think we'll wrap it up. I know I've taken more time than we were supposed to.
So we're definitely not going to fault Ben for going over on time, because this is the real meat part of it. Working the mitigation action forms and then working the projects. That's why we're doing this training. If you want to log back on, we're doing one more training 1 week from today. You can use that same registration link. Just go back and register again if there's something that maybe you're a little unclear on. You can sit through the training one more time. We're also recording these trainings, and we'll have those posted on the University of Louisville Center for Hazard Research site, and we'll have them posted on kym.ky.gov. We'll have them posted on that site also. So we really want to thank Ben and Andrea for all their hard work today in presenting, and thank Ben for going into the real granular detail of it. Like Ben said, are there any kind of questions that you might have before we close it down? And Thank you, Jenny Jo. We appreciate you, and we appreciate the grant managers and all the hard work that they do. From a program point of view, reach out to your grant managers. They can help you on the types of projects you might want to work on, and the details from FEMA. From a system point of view, be sure and reach out to myself and also to reach out to Ben and the folks from University of Louisville. So unless there are any questions, I'm going to go ahead and end the webinar. We want to thank you guys for participating today. Thanks for joining us, and hopefully we'll be seeing you again soon. Thanks a bunch. Have a great day.
Thank you.